You wake up feeling exhausted. You can't focus, your memory is slipping, and a heavy cloud of anxiety and brain fog follows you all day. You try taking nootropics, drinking more coffee, or even trying antidepressants, but nothing clears the fog. What if the problem isn't actually in your head? What if your brain is literally on fire because of a microscopic leak in your stomach? Today, we expose the leaky gut, leaky brain connection. This video is for educational purposes only. Cognitive decline and severe mental health conditions require professional medical evaluation. The information provided here is to support general brain health and metabolic function, not to diagnose, treat, or cure conditions like Alzheimer's, severe depression, or ADHD. Never alter your psychiatric medications without strict supervision from your doctor or psychiatrist. If you have lived inside that fog, you already know how brutal it is. It is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is not a lack of discipline. When your mind feels slow, your anxiety is high, and your energy is flat, your entire life starts to shrink. You stop trusting your memory. You start doubting yourself. And because the world keeps telling you to just push harder, many people do the exact opposite of what their body needs. They stimulate a system that is already under strain. Here is the myth: that every cognitive problem is just a brain problem, and every brain problem can be solved by pouring more stimulation on top of it. More caffeine. More nootropics. More urgency. But if the brain is inflamed, overstressed, and running on emergency chemistry, stimulants are not a real solution. They are often just a louder signal over a deeper problem. That is like whipping a sick horse and expecting healing. It may move faster for a moment, but it does not restore function. So let us shift the paradigm. The brain does not exist in isolation. It is part of a whole body biological system. Your gut, your immune system, your mitochondria, your nervous system, and your brain are in constant conversation. When that conversation is healthy, you get clarity, resilience, and stable mood. When that conversation breaks down, the brain does not just feel tired. It starts to feel chemically, electrically, and metabolically overwhelmed. And that is why the answer is often not to force the brain harder. The answer is to look upstream. We have to ask a better question. What is sending stress signals into the brain in the first place? In the next chapter, we are going to look at the blood-brain barrier, the gut-brain axis, and the security system that is supposed to protect your brain from outside chaos. Because once you understand that system, the whole story of brain fog starts to make sense. Now let us talk about the blood-brain barrier, or BBB. Think of it as a highly secure VIP fortress surrounding the brain. Its job is not to let everything in. Its job is to protect the most delicate tissue in the human body. It carefully controls what crosses into the brain, allowing in oxygen, glucose, and select nutrients, while blocking out unwanted chemical noise, toxins, and immune chaos. This barrier is not just a wall. It is a microscopic security checkpoint made of tightly packed cells, support structures, and signaling systems that constantly monitor traffic. Under normal conditions, it behaves like an elite border control unit. It does not panic. It does not allow random substances to wander in. It preserves the stability the brain needs to think clearly, regulate mood, and process information efficiently. But the brain is never truly isolated, because the gut and the brain are in constant communication through the gut-brain axis. One of the most important pathways in that conversation is the vagus nerve, a vast biological superhighway carrying signals between your digestive system and your central nervous system. What happens in the gut does not stay in the gut. It sends messages upstream, and those messages can change how the brain feels, fires, and functions. When the gut environment is calm, nourished, and balanced, the brain receives information that supports resilience. But when the gut is stressed, irritated, and inflamed, the brain receives a very different message: danger, disruption, and metabolic strain. That is why anxiety, mood instability, and cognitive fatigue often track with digestive dysfunction, food intolerance, and chronic inflammation. So the BBB is the fortress. The gut is the front line. And the nervous system is constantly reading the condition of both. The critical question is this: what happens when the gut barrier becomes compromised, and toxic compounds begin slipping into the bloodstream? Because once that happens, the security system of the brain is forced into emergency mode. And that is where neuroinflammation begins. Here is where the story gets serious. When the gut lining is under chronic stress, the barrier that is supposed to keep the inside of the gut safely separated from the bloodstream can become more permeable. People call this leaky gut. That does not mean the gut is falling apart. It means the barrier is becoming less selective, less resilient, and less able to keep inflammatory debris where it belongs. And when that barrier weakens, one of the most important troublemakers in the conversation is LPS, or lipopolysaccharide. LPS is a structural component of certain bacteria. In a healthy system, it stays contained. But when gut integrity is compromised, fragments of these bacterial compounds can escape into circulation. Once in the bloodstream, they can act like biological alarm signals, telling the immune system that something is wrong. Now imagine the blood-brain barrier as that highly secure fortress we just discussed. It is designed to protect the brain from exactly this kind of chaos. But if the body is repeatedly flooded with inflammatory signals, the fortress can become strained. It may become more vulnerable, less stable, and more likely to let stress signals influence the brain environment. In other words, what starts in the gut does not stay in the gut. Once those inflammatory signals reach the brain, the immune cells of the central nervous system begin to react. These cells, including microglia, function like the brain's internal security and cleanup crew. But when they are constantly triggered, they can stay in an activated state too long. That is when the brain's fire alarm starts ringing non-stop. And that chronic alarm state is neuroinflammation. It can show up as brain fog, low mood, emotional reactivity, poor concentration, mental fatigue, and that awful feeling that your brain just will not come online. So when people say, "My mind feels broken," what they may actually be experiencing is a biologically stressed nervous system reacting to ongoing inflammatory input. Once the brain is caught in neuroinflammation, you do not solve the problem by chasing symptoms alone. You have to go upstream. You have to ask, what is keeping the fire alive? In many people, the answer starts in the gut. If the gut barrier is leaking inflammatory signals into the bloodstream, the brain cannot fully calm down. That means the first priority is not to think your way out of brain fog. The first priority is to reduce the biological input that is feeding it. So the strategy is simple in principle, even if it takes consistency in practice. Seal the gut, lower inflammation, and reduce the load on the nervous system. That means choosing an anti-inflammatory diet built around whole foods, enough protein, fiber, and micronutrients, while aggressively reducing the processed inputs that keep the immune system irritated. One of the biggest wins for many people is reducing ultra-processed foods and industrial seed oils that can keep the body in a stressed state. The goal is not perfection. The goal is to stop pouring fuel on the fire. When you remove repeated irritation, the gut gets a chance to stabilize, the immune system quiets down, and the brain is no longer being constantly bombarded by inflammatory noise. Then comes restoration. Support the gut microbiome with fiber-rich foods, fermented foods if tolerated, adequate hydration, sunlight, movement, and restorative sleep. And do not overlook the vagus nerve. Calm breathing, humming, slow walking, and nervous system regulation practices can help reinforce the signal of safety between the gut and the brain. When the gut stops shouting danger, the brain finally has space to recover. That is the shift from constant inflammatory signaling to biological repair. In the next section, we will go one step further and talk about how to support the brain itself with targeted neuro-antioxidants and structural support once the inflow of inflammation is under control. Now that the inflow of inflammatory stress from the gut has been reduced, the brain finally has a chance to recover. This is the part most people miss. You do not just want to stop the fire. You also want to support the terrain the fire damaged. That means giving the nervous system the raw materials it needs to stabilize oxidative stress, protect cellular membranes, and support healthy brain signaling. This is where neurological rehabilitation becomes practical. Once the gut is calmer, the brain tends to respond better to targeted support. Antioxidant-rich nutrition, adequate protein, trace minerals, restorative sleep, hydration, and carefully chosen compounds that help defend the brain against oxidative stress. The goal is not to chase a dramatic feeling. The goal is to restore function. That is exactly why some people choose a premium cognitive support formula built with targeted neuro-antioxidants and barrier-supportive ingredients. A well-designed protocol can be used as part of a broader recovery strategy to support clarity, calm, and structural resilience in the nervous system. Think of it as giving the brain the materials it needs after the storm has passed. If you are ready to go deeper, check the link in the description for the Cognitive Recovery Blueprint and the Neuroinflammation and Cognitive Support Protocol. This is where you can continue the process of calming the gut, supporting the brain, and rebuilding momentum from the inside out. And as always, do not stop psychiatric medications abruptly, and do not make changes to prescribed treatment without speaking to your doctor or psychiatrist. This content is educational and supportive, not a substitute for individualized medical care.